I just saw two mighty rivers that were seeming to converge in some chasms that they both were running into. So there were these two waterfalls, really massive waterfalls that both were pouring in from opposite directions. I'd say, from my perspective, it's from the east and the west. And they were pouring into this, what seemed like an endlessly or infinitely deep chasm. But then they rushed at such a force and volume that the chasm filled up really quickly, so obviously it wasn't infinite. But I think what would naturally happen is that when it did fill up, they would begin to spread. The rivers would spread out, overflow and maybe create some big body of water.
Okay.
But it almost seemed like these two rivers were opposing forces of a kind, and so I saw the one, I guess, again from my perspective, from the east actually overcame the one coming from the west.
Okay.
And so that it actually pushed the one that was flowing opposite to it, and actually created a new flow of water. So after the chasm had been filled up, it reversed the flow and continued traveling what was now westward. So now it was traveling westward.
Oh, okay.
And that's all I saw in that vision.
Do you understand what that means? Yeah, wisdom gives doing the whole interpretation. That's terrible. So, you know what the east, the west means, right? Amen. What it means?
To me, it means as far as the east is from the west, like the Lord.
Oh. Team might have some understanding. Go ahead.
May have to sit on it a minute. A minute.
Oh, that's his comments. Nothing to say. So. Do you have an understanding?
No, I don't.
Yeah.
This is while we were praying for Nicole that you had.
You let me explain to you. I think East represents our ministry. The West is a ministry from the past. You receive from the Lord. The chasm, the capacity is your spiritual container, ability. The overflow, not East, West per se, it's the mindset of things in your own heart, so perception things from the West culture or East culture, maybe whether that from China or from the Middle East, who knows, blessing. So I would look at it as a certain Western culture way to understand God's will in your life, not necessarily bad at all, but there's things need to be conversed together, to work out in your life. You begin to work it out, so when you begin to work it out, then God's work is overflow in your life, so, yeah.
Two rivers coming together in massive waterfalls is a violent thing.
Violent thing.
It's a violent, terrifying, powerful thing.
Yeah.
And when they're going down into this darkness cavern, that's
a lot of force.
Scary.
Yeah.
But at the end, when they rise up and overflow, there's peace and calm.
Peace. That's great.
But there's a lot of turmoil to get to that place. And there's two that become one, basically, right?
Yes. That's wonderful interpretation. I think so.
I saw the same thing.
Yeah, the same thing.
I was thinking about how troubled those waters would be when the two were coming together.
Yeah.
And actually that it may seem that there's an opposition, but that's only because there's a void.
Yeah.
In reality, there's no opposition.
There's no opposition.
Because once the void is filled, everything switches directions.
Yes.
So what was formerly seemed to be an opposing force no longer even existed. It was turned back.
Yeah.
Which would have always been the case without that void.
Yes.
The void. I don't know that. Obviously, there's a personal application, but I think that this is the great void in the. It's kind of funny to talk about it in such a way because Christianity for a long evangelical Christianity has for many decades talk about the filling of the void in man's heart. And basically everything that's descriptive of salvation is illustrated by that chasm between God and man. And that, Jesus fills that, and that's the only way for us to have salvation and get to God. So that's always pictured as a giant 2 sets of cliffs and no way to cross, except by the cross, right? It's illustrated in all the pamphlets and everything that the cross of Jesus is what enables us to cross the void. So in essence, it's the cross that fills the void. Jesus is the filling of the void in man's heart. What contemporary evangelical Christianity in particular is completely unaware of is that the void of man's heart, or even within the context of Christians, they've created a void. And rather than the cross really being what has filled the gap, you have two opposing forces that are now coming into the same being. So it's created a lot of troubled waters for Christianity. What are the two primary things that are the drivers of the force of man, or the one side? In a sense, what is traveling from the west to the east. I think about that even in the context that Emmanuel touched on, which is Christianity as it has been flourishing in the West, since the time of Constantine, through the Roman Empire, and then making a westward movement through the European empires and kings and everything, all the way to America. Having some establishment and flourishing in America, it then began to move back. So it changed directions. So now we're seeing, for instance, even in our engagements with some beautiful people in Kenya, that this opposing force, this other movement, it as it comes back, it's creating nothing. First of all, the void's not filled. The void in this case then is not salvation or the inability to achieve salvation, but the fulfillment of God's purpose. However, God's purpose will be fulfilled nonetheless, both through the way the man does things. God doesn't ignore those. In fact, he will use those things as a divine enablement. So Jacob's trouble, all of these things that are the backward movement of man's imagination, his ways, and the influence of demonic wisdom. Now, what is that? Within Christianity in particular, it's the religious spirit and the familiar spirit. They come like, I saw this imagery, I didn't see it in a picture, but I knew it was like, it was the overwhelming flood of the enemy. That's mentioned in a couple different ways in Scripture. One in Isaiah 59 talks about the enemy coming like a pent-up flood. Also in Revelation, where the dragon spews out the flood to consume the woman in the desert. And then there's a chasm open up in the earth to swallow it up. So obviously there's a lot of various interpretations. This is not a singular understanding of those scriptures, but the reality is that it's an opposing, consuming force, and it's something that has to. It's not something that any believer will be able to escape. Where we may think we have filled a void in our lives for fulfillment. So that fulfillment in evangelical Christianity is, you no longer need to fear death because you're going to live forever with God in heaven. Yet then, why are we so unfulfilled? Why then has God allowed for that message of salvation in its narrowness and shallowness to be the only thing that we really gain out of the last 2,000 years of history of the church and God's people.
Yes, sir.
Why would God continue that? You know, it should be really obvious because there's something more. Because if that really was the end, then Christ's return would have come in a very short order. So God wants something else. There's another void to be filled. So man, in his religious pursuit of the familiar things to his understanding of God's ways, continued to pour in to, in fact, I would imagine, this may not have been presented in your vision at all. Was there a priority, a stream that you saw first, or but the imagery was just immediately the chasm and both rivers flowing in?
Yeah, the latter is.
The latter?
Yeah.
So, that's, yeah. I'm not seeing, what I am seeing is that in the Christian's life, it's almost like the one flow goes into the chasm, but never fills it. It never fills it. Now, God can increase the measure of his outflow. It never stops, and it's never exhausted. It can be increased or decreased through the seasons and epochs of man's existence, and we've seen that. So maybe where we've seen some past revivals and movements, maybe we've seen a bit of an overflow, but never really a full change of direction. So as the consuming nature of man continues to pull in, that's new generations come. New generations who have not yet fulfilled their purpose. So the void opens that much more. Maybe there were generations where the flow filled and it became full, but it really never changed direction. But another generation comes and it is born empty, in a sense that its purpose hasn't been fulfilled, hasn't filled up, its consummation hasn't come. And so, that's something in the scriptures where the Lord says, in the last days I will pour out my spirit in such a way that something altogether different will happen.
Yeah.
So, I think that the enemy's flood, the primary forces, and this is something that's more obviously because of the influence that God would have his people make in the earth and in creation. God doesn't make illustrations and examples out of unbelievers' lives. Pagan, unregenerated people with no knowledge or any recognition of God's work.
Yes.
There's nothing to do there.
Yeah, why should he?
And then the enemy doesn't have much to do with them either, because there's really no deceit to make. But in the midst of God's people, in the heart of a believer, in the context of Christianity, there's a work to be done. That's a problem for the enemy. That's where his labor, his efforts, the exertion of the authority that he has, whatever measure of authority that he has to work with, is spent there. It's not foolishly spent on a conquered town. That's unwise. And Christianity would love to think of Satan as an idiot, but he's not.
Attack the targets, his targets.
He is very tactical and strategic. He's not dumb.
Yeah.
He may not be wise, but he's not dumb.
Yeah.
He's not stupid.
That's right.
He's not divided.
That's very right.
His intentions are not mixed. He's not at war with himself. He has legions and assignments and thrones and powers and position.
That's right.
And ability. And he doesn't throw them away. He uses them very strategically. Some of those very strategic weapons, and I have to give a little bit of context because we use the words and we point toward the spirits of religion and familiarity so much that they've maybe lost their potency, or we have become less sober in our awareness and understanding and willingness to engage them. They can't, you're not going to outrun that. Not these spirits. They adamantly pursue the people of God to do what? To overtake. And when they come to be mixed up with the opposing flow, well, there's has been mentioned, there's a huge tribulation and trouble in the depths of an individual soul, but also in the midst of a generation of God's people. So God, in a sense, has ordained this trouble for the sole purpose that his life overcomes. But many are unwilling to even go through the trouble.
Don't you think it's necessary?
Or to recognize what it is. Nicole, I think the struggle then there obviously is personal and individual for your own family and whatever else. But as Emmanuel mentioned, this is an issue for the bride that's troubling. And why do we travail in the sense in that way? Well, we need to allow things to come to their fullness. And in the process there are those, and God gives us the grace, if we're willing, to be greater, to give a greater reception to the flow that comes from his throne. That's from east to west. From east to west. We have the capacity. Now, interestingly, if one flows but doesn't fill, and the other flows and fills, then the more that we allow one to flow, the quicker that will fill and then turn the tide.
Turn the tide, that's right. Yeah.
But if we inhibit the flow of one, first of all, we will never be filled, but because the flow of the one never stops, there will always be trouble in the deeps, but never filling. Here's another thing. The more the chasm is filled, the less turbulence there is in the deep places. The deep places. The unseen places. The unspoken places. In the depths. Once it's full, then even the currents in the lower places, in the deep places, they go to peace. And when the direction changes, then there's a reverse flow. Everything dissipates. Then whatever measure of truth that has been twisted by the deception of the enemy, because the spirit and the spirits of religion and familiarity would not have any strength at all if they didn't carry with them some measure of truth. They couldn't even be considered a counterfeit if they didn't carry some measure of reality.
That's hard part. Yes, that's true. That's true.
Then the cleansing of the flood of God's mercy and grace and truth will untangle and straighten out, and everything everything that's true remains, and everything that it can only dissipate. It can only be turned away, pressed out to another direction, to go to its own ends. So I think you had more.
It's tough battle. Yes, go ahead.
The two other ones I saw, the second one was, I think, kind of maybe a bit of an encouragement on how to deal with, I guess, demonic forces in a way.
Can you sit here? I know you're a little bit tired, but I want you the recording could pick up your voice.
Oh,
I remember when you were there, the voice not that good. You can sit here or sit here. I would rather for you to sit here. So yeah. Ben, can you tune up the camera to show them? I was gonna see it. Thank you.
In this second vision, I saw a shark fin actually that was approaching where I was.
Okay.
And it was very simple. I just saw that despite the the menacing nature of the shark approaching with its fin emerged from the water, I just saw a hand grab the fin directly and just
hold it out,
tear the shark
out
of the water.
Big one.
In a pretty violent. Yeah, it was a big one.
Okay.
Just kind of violently grab it, and I think proceeding that it was probably put to death or something.
Put it to death, destroyed it.
But yeah, it was kind of a reversal of who was actually.
That's interesting.
Who was actually the threat, because sharks, when I don't know the actual purpose of their doing that, but it was a sign of danger, and it seemed like you were the one in trouble, but it was actually because his fin was emerged from the water to present himself as someone that was dangerous. It was actually because of that the hand was able to grab it.
Expose it.
Expose itself.
Yeah. That's a good one. Hey Tim, remember the some dreams game or Ouija game to us about the shark attacking people, get the little boat, try to get to the ark, so sharks being attacking people. And the one gone in trouble, being attacked by sharks, is people think they can help the little ones, struggling in the water. Interesting. The little one is immature Christians, I think, so to refuse to be helped, so they're in the ocean full of danger still for sharks. Anyway, go ahead.
The final vision I saw was, I didn't have much detail in this one, but I just saw these really long, very large, wide highways that were traveling across this countryside or this landscape. So obviously very industrial too, so it was all concrete, asphalt, and things. And I saw that there was this force of some kind that was actually moving along underneath, so in the ground and underneath these highways, that was kind of breaking everything up. So the highways were being kind of broken and cast aside, these really large highways that were traveling across the landscape.
The highway is breaking off, another one come out, or
that's actually what I expected. I thought that they were going to be perhaps replaced. But I had this impression that instead of that, this landscape or this land was being cleared of these pathways or these venues of man. So these ways in which, I guess, the world was able to access this land through transportation. They were being cleared away entirely, so that a new, I guess I had this impression that was a new people or something that were going to settle in this
land, become farmers.
Not create a new transportation to get through the land, but actually settle in this land. And that all entry points of industrial man were being
being
uprooted
okay.
by whatever this force was that was moving.
Industrial man. Oh, that's interesting.
So all these
farmer become agriculture.
Yeah, I did have the impression that it was going to be a land for agriculture potentially.
Yeah, well, you're going to do the job.
Which one? The agriculture?
Agriculture, yes, agriculture is your generation. I firmly believe it. I don't think the way you saw is coincidental. Yeah.
I saw earlier something that I think might be slightly related. It was me, but it wasn't me. Like I don't know if it was necessarily me.
It's you, not you. What's confusing?
I was carrying 2 bundles of wheat on my shoulders.
Oh, seriously? Okay.
And they were pretty big bundles.
Yes.
But the way I was walking and the way I was carrying them was, again, it felt more representative of, and I was thinking about it earlier when we were praying.
Spiritual person.
For Noah. But there was a weird, it was like a weird feel of like confidence and levity, almost lightheartedness. It wasn't like this terrible burden. It was like a happy
harvester.
Like carrying these bundles of wheat.
Yeah.
But
harvesting.
So I mean that was all it was.
The joy of harvesting. That's all in the Bible, man. Scriptures, the joy of a harvester, carrying the barns, the wheat in the barn.